It's been said that the most dangerous time for a victim in an abusive relationship is when they decide to leave. And the story we're going to discuss today, a woman named Jessica Boynton, was at a turning point after being trapped in a toxic marriage. By spring of 2016, she secured a new job, a place to stay, and packed all her bags, all set to leave her husband Matthew for a fresh new start on her own. She'd even been keeping a journal to document things as leverage for a divorce. However, on April 14th, just one day before she was supposed to move in with family, an incident took place that disrupted Jessica's plans. Following an argument, her husband Matthew placed a call to 911 claiming that Jessica had sent him a text expressing that she was having thoughts. Not long after, gunshots were heard throughout the apartment complex. Jessica was found in a locked closet with a severe head wound, which was quickly deemed self-inflicted. While everyone should be able to trust the police, unfortunately for Jessica, Matthew was a respected officer with ties to other high-ranking local officials as well. This led many to believe that law enforcement mishandled the investigation, covering up what took place in order to protect one of their own. In this video, we'll be going over all of the details so you can form your own opinion of what really happened to Jessica. To do that, we need to go behind the headlines. Born in September of 1996, Jessica Lester's life started off tougher than most. After essentially being abandoned by her parents at the age of 3, Jessica, her sister Dusty, and brother Alex were taken in to be raised by their grandparents, Martha and Phil Wise. She grew up on their small farm in Zebulon, located in Pike County, Georgia. Even though Jessica was always around the men of the family shooting guns on the farm, she was never really interested in trying it out herself. Instead, she enjoyed playing soccer, softball, participating in dance, dressing up, and making crafts. While attending Pike County High School during her sophomore year, Jessica was introduced to a junior named Matthew Boynton. He was a jock and pretty well known due to his grandpa, Wendell Beam, being the sheriff in the neighboring county. Matthew Lee Boynton was born in December of 1995 and grew up alongside his younger brother Coleman. His parents got divorced when he was younger, but his mother Jenny raised him with the help of his grandparents. It's unclear how much his father Jimmy was in the picture, but according to his stepmother Amy, Matthew had been violent with her before, which put a strain on his relationship with that side of the family. It's clear that Matthew looked up to his grandpa Wendell and even idolized him for being in law enforcement. Now, Jessica's grandparents were pretty hesitant to let her date, but they allowed Matthew to come to the farm to hang out, and the two quickly fell for each other. Even with strict rules, just 1 year after dating, Jessica became pregnant at just 16 years old and in her junior year. Martha and Phil offered to help raise the baby, but Jessica was adamant about wanting to settle down with Matthew. They quickly moved in together in a house located across the street from his grandpa Wendell, but almost immediately, Jessica began to feel isolated. Being a pregnant teen can be isolating as it is, but she had also decided to complete her diploma online and was no longer seeing her friends. Matthew rarely wanted her to go out to see her family either, which was causing a rift in their relationship. She ultimately decided to move back home after giving birth to their son Tolan. She stayed there for around a year so that she could have help with the baby while finishing school. After graduating, Jessica moved back in with Matthew, and this time he wanted to make sure she didn't leave. They got engaged, and from then on, it seemed like Matthew wanted to keep visits with Jessica's family as short as possible. He was well on his way to fulfilling his dream of being in law enforcement, getting hired as a jailer at the Pike County Sheriff's Office fresh out of high school. After that, he was hired as a parole officer in Griffin, which is the largest city in Spalding County. At the department, he was known for being extremely rigid, with one senior officer even having to pull him aside on occasion to tell him to lighten up. It seemed like the power of being an officer was getting to his head, and he exercised this control at home as well. He didn't want Jessica to leave their home while he was at work and kept the keys to their truck with him while out on patrol. He also controlled their debit card and finances, and if Jessica wanted to go out to the store, she'd have to ask his family members for a ride. Even though Matthew could be overbearing, Jessica wanted her kids to be raised by both of their parents, which is something neither she nor Matthew experienced growing up. Regardless of their problems, she was determined to make it work. In mid-2015, while trying to plan their wedding, Jessica had been begging Matthew to take her to see a potential venue that was located in Perry. However, Matthew was a little less interested in the details of the wedding and refused to go along. So she decided to drive herself to Perry, but on the way had car trouble and was stranded on the side of the road. According to her, a man stopped to help her, and as strange as it sounds, one thing led to another, and they ended up sleeping together. Even though she was literally on her way to look at a place to get married, this guy gave her the right amount of attention at the right time. Instead of being a mistake that could have been left in the past, Jessica actually became pregnant from this encounter. Her family members have wondered if this was a subconscious way for Jessica to get out of her relationship, but if that's true, it didn't work. She ultimately confessed to Matthew about the fling, and even though he was upset, he told her that he'd raise the baby as his own. Some people have said that this was another way of Matthew exercising control over Jessica, basically saying, not even an affair will end this relationship. But others have said it just shows how much he loved her and wanted to keep their family together. But regardless, they got married in October of 2015 while Jessica was pregnant with their soon-to-be second child. After giving birth to their son Tyler, the Boyntons moved into an apartment complex called Ashford Place in Griffin. Jessica was still pretty isolated at home, but she became fast friends with a neighbor in the complex named Megan Browning. When Jessica and Matthew first moved in, Megan was pregnant and the two young moms immediately clicked. Megan described Jessica as being extremely attentive and a loving mother, but she always felt a little off about Matthew. While Jessica was outgoing, bubbly, and positive, Matthew seemed standoffish and had an arrogant attitude. Megan sensed the dynamics of the relationship, with everything essentially being Matthew's way or the highway. She also said that he very rarely, if ever, helped with the boys, and was much more focused on his career than his fatherly duties. Over the next 6 months, Megan could tell that things weren't going well for Jessica and Matthew. While he was at work, Jessica would often come over and have long talks about wanting to get a job to have some independence. She'd also talk about arguments between her and Matthew, and even though they'd only been married a short time, there was clearly major trouble in paradise. In fact, Jessica started to feel like she may want to get a divorce and started keeping a secret journal about everything going on. She documented their fights, spending habits, and ideas she had pertaining to custody arrangements, child support, and alimony. She also started to become suspicious that Matthew was having an affair, and Jessica and Megan even looked at his car's GPS history and social media accounts for proof. That's where she found conversations between Matthew and a dispatcher from a neighboring department named Courtney Calloway, and Jessica wrote down as much evidence as she could to use later on. Jessica wasn't the only one creating a paper trail though, and it seemed like any time the couple got into an argument, Matthew would call the police instead of trying to work things out himself. According to other officers, it's not uncommon for there to be struggles in marriages due to the stress of the job and long irregular hours. However, it is pretty uncommon for an officer to air out these problems at work, with most choosing to keep their home lives private. But Matthew was really open with his buddies about the problems in his marriage and seemingly used 911 as mediation or a way to intimidate Jessica. After finding evidence of an affair, Jessica finally decided to tell her grandparents that she wanted to file for divorce. Even though she knew she hadn't been happy for a while, she was in surprisingly good spirits. It was as if Matthew finding someone else meant that their breakup wouldn't be as hard. Her grandparents helped her to set up an appointment with a divorce attorney and various job interviews. She had success with the local chiropractor's office, who asked her back for a second interview before ultimately hiring her as a receptionist. With the job lined up, her sister Dusty agreed for Jessica to move in with her for a while until she could get on her feet. With everything falling into place, Jessica actually seemed happier than ever. Jessica was set to begin her new job on April 15, 2016. She also packed up a large duffel bag of belongings and bags for the boys to take with her after she broke the news to Matthew that she was leaving. However, on the night of April 14th, the couple was arguing again. Jessica had asked Matthew to make their son a doctor's appointment, but he apparently forgot. She also wanted to go to the store to get baby Tyler some formula. Even though he was breastfed, Jessica had been trying to wean him and introduce him to formula for when she started her new job. Before going to the store, Jessica walked into the bathroom where Matthew was taking a shower. She opened the curtain and he was inside the shower texting someone on his phone. Obviously, that's pretty sketchy, and clearly he was hiding something, so Jessica snatched the phone out of his hands. That's when she saw a Snapchat of a woman in her underwear, the same woman she'd found messages from on his social media, Courtney Calloway. Matthew wrestled the phone back from Jessica, but she started poking him in the chest, demanding that he admit that he was having an affair. In their fight, Matthew ended up locking Jessica out of their apartment, so she went over to Megan's house to talk. A little while later, Matthew texted Jessica telling her to come back so that they could go get formula at Walmart. I think it's pretty telling that Matthew wouldn't just let Jessica go to Walmart on her own, especially since they were arguing. I guess he just really didn't trust her alone with the vehicle and debit card, or maybe he just didn't want to be alone with the kids, but regardless, Megan told her to come back after they got home, but unfortunately, Jessica never did. At around 10:15, Walmart security cameras captured the Boyntons arriving at the store and walking in together. While shopping, Jessica and Matthew got into another argument in the baby aisle over which formula to get. Jessica tried to explain to him that they needed to get the more expensive, sensitive type since he was transitioning from breast milk, but Matthew insisted on being in control of what they were going to buy. After the argument, Jessica stormed out of the Walmart to cool off. Matthew then decided to call another fellow officer to report that Jessica was refusing to leave with him. The officer told Matthew he couldn't force his wife to get in the truck if she didn't want to, but Matthew later said he just wanted to make sure he wouldn't get in trouble for leaving her there. However, security cameras actually captured Jessica rejoining Matthew in the store and the family leaving together. After returning home just after 11 p.m., Megan tried to text Jessica, but she got no response. She figured she was just busy getting the boys to bed, but she was admittedly worried since she knew the couple had been arguing. Not long after, a Griffin police officer named Adam Trammell arrived at Jessica and Matthew's apartment. He was sent out by his lieutenant to get Matthew's statement about what took place at the Walmart. Matthew was already waiting outside and explained their argument over the cell phone earlier in the night and what happened at the store. However, he strangely left out the part where Jessica did get back in the truck and said that he left her there after she told him she'd get another ride. During their interaction, Trammell's body cam was dead, and he decided not to go upstairs to question Jessica regarding her version of events. After talking to Matthew, Trammell left and decided to just write down the report from memory later on. Since Jessica wasn't texting her back, Megan decided to lay down with her fiance to try to get some sleep. However, at some time between 11 and 11:30, she heard what sounded like a gunshot ring out within their apartment complex. About 15 minutes later, she heard another, causing both her and her fiance to sit up in bed. She got up and looked out her window and saw Matthew speeding down the road in his truck. Megan has said that she wanted to go over and check on Jessica, but her fiance told her to stay home. After all, there was a gun range located near their apartments, and he was sure that Jessica was fine, even though Megan thought the shots sounded much closer than normal. Around an hour or so later, Matthew made plans with another fellow officer, Joshua Guthrie, to grab a late-night bite to eat at Waffle House. However, on the way, Matthew reportedly got a concerning text from Jessica at 12:45 a.m. The text message said, "I can't do this anymore. Take care of Tolan and Tyler. Please tell them I love them every day. I have been suffering for a while now, and no one has noticed. Here lately, I have not been able to recognize the person I see in the mirror. This is not the first time I've had thoughts. I love you and the boys." A few minutes later, Matthew called the station to request EMS. He explained what the text message said and that he believed Jessica might be trying to hurt herself.
Hey, are you on EMS?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can you please dispatch a unit out to my location? It's in reference to my wife. She's having faults. She told me to take care of the boys, so I'm trying to hurry up and get back home just to make sure that nothing's going to happen to them.
Any weapons inside the house?
Just my service weapon.
From there, he turned his truck around to head back to the apartment, and just 6 minutes later, he used his police radio to report that as he was walking up the stairs to his apartment, he had heard 2 gunshots.
I believe I just heard a shot fired coming in my residence. I just came up the stairs 2 rounds. Be advised of a smoke gun smoke. And I can't get an answer to the door.
He reportedly ran in the house, set down his keys and cell phone, and made his way to the master bedroom. He tried to open the closet door where he kept his service belt, but it was locked. Tyler normally slept with them, so when he didn't see them in their bedroom, he claimed that he thought it was an active shooter situation and that Jessica was going to kill him, the kids, and then herself. Instead of trying to find the boys or bust down the closet door, Matthew went back outside to wait for help. Just a few minutes later, officers arrived at the complex and made their way past Matthew and up the stairs. They entered the apartment and immediately found Tolan sound asleep in his bed and Tyler crying in his crib in their respective bedrooms. They entered the master bedroom cautiously and found that the closet door was locked from the inside. They made the decision to break down the door, which is where they found Jessica on the ground with her head lying on a bloody pillow.
Hang on, sweetie, okay? trying to get up. Can we get her out to the bedroom? Yeah. Yeah, I see it.
I guess we'll have to.
Mickey,
Move this.
okay, we got to get her out.
Get this stuff right here out. Start throwing this out.
One officer reached down, and even though the situation looked grim, she was shockingly still alive. The officers pulled Jessica out of the closet, and it was clear she suffered a head wound, barely conscious and clinging to life. Underneath her, they found Matthew's service weapon and saw 2 bullet holes in the closet, leading them to believe that she had tried to kill herself. When EMS arrived, they could see that Jessica's hair was matted with blood, but they couldn't find an entry or exit wound to stop the bleeding.
Jessica. I know it is.
I can't tell, man.
I can't either.
To the top.
You got somebody that can run to my pickup?
Outside, Matthew was seemingly hysterical as Jessica was wheeled into an ambulance and then transported by helicopter to Atlanta Medical Center.
This can't happen, man. Fucking love her. She loved me. She told me she loved me before she did it.
Soon, Sheriff Wendell Beam, Matthew's grandfather, arrived at the scene. Even though Jessica was very much alive, for some reason, he made the decision to send officers over to her grandparents' house to tell them that she had. Her grandma Martha was immediately skeptical, stating that Jessica was terrified of guns and didn't even know how to use one. Back at the apartment, Megan was woken up by the commotion and thought for sure that her best friend was dead. She was relieved to learn that Jessica was still hanging on and told them about the gunshot she heard hours before. She was also adamant that Jessica would never try to kill herself, but investigators continued to treat it as an attempted suicide. At the apartment, investigators soon found some strange things inside the closet. Most notably was the lack of blood splatter on any of the walls that would be expected from someone shooting themselves in the head. The only blood was concentrated on the pillow on the floor. Also, the location of her injury, which ended up being directly on top of her head, was strange for someone attempting to shoot themselves as well. It's also pretty uncommon for 2 shots to be fired during an attempted, but the second shot was located near the floor, leading them to believe it was accidentally fired as she fell or after she hit the ground. In the closet, investigators also located Jessica's divorce diary sitting out in plain view on a shelf, but some pages were clearly ripped out. When Jessica arrived at Atlanta Medical, doctors decided the best way to keep her alive was to place her in a medically induced coma. Her doctor shaved her head to locate the gunshot wounds, which is when another peculiar discovery was made. There were no gunshot wounds, and in fact, the 2-inch gash actually resembled a blunt force trauma injury. Her hands also appeared to be completely clean, with no signs of gunpowder burns. Even with these strange circumstances, for some reason, they never tested her hands, or Matthew's hands, for gunpowder residue, which you would expect in this type of investigation. The only hope of finding out what happened in the closet was to wait for Jessica to wake up. The Griffin police requested assistance from the GBI for the investigation, with the main agent, Chris DeMarco, being a familiar colleague of Matthew's grandfather, Wendell Beam. When DeMarco first questioned Matthew, he told him that they may need to collect his clothes as evidence. Matthew told him that was fine and even stated, "I didn't try to brush off anything or wash my hands. I didn't even think about getting any other clothes."
The clothes you have on now were the clothes you were wearing tonight?
Yes, I didn't have time, with everything going on. I didn't think anything about getting any other clothes, so I didn't know if y'all would want these or not. I didn't bring any other ones with me.
However, many people have noticed that in the body cam footage from outside their apartment, Matthew was wearing a red sweater, whereas in the Walmart footage, he was wearing a gray sweater. Some people think this indicates that he did actually change clothes, but he might have just changed them after they got home from Walmart and before the incident. Matthew also said that before he left for Waffle House, Jessica was acting strange and asked him to call an ambulance. When Matthew asked why, she reportedly closed the door in his face, so he left.
I could have just fucking jumped. I mean, if I could have been here 2 minutes earlier, man, I could have jumped in front of the gun and tried to get it from her, man.
Look, man, look. She's still breathing. She's got good pulse, blood pressure.
Man.
She's even fighting with EMS, dude.
Where did she shoot herself at?
I couldn't tell.
Man. She would have never done this. I don't know why. I mean, I was telling Guthrie, man, I was supposed to go eat with Guthrie. I got ready to leave, and I got ready to walk out the door and started walking down the steps. I didn't even get halfway. She asked me to come back, and she was crying. And she asked me, she said, well, can you call EMS? I said, okay, well, you know, what's wrong? And I asked her 2 or 3 times, and she just looked at me and just kept crying. I said, can you please tell me what's wrong? You know, I mean, are you having trouble breathing, or, you know, what is it? She said, never mind, don't worry about it.
The GBI also questioned several neighbors from within the apartment complex, and more witnesses other than just Megan and her fiance said that they also heard gunshots that night. However, everyone who heard shots stated that they were hours before Matthew reported the shots at 1 a.m. and more close to 11 p.m. like Megan originally said. Even with all of these discrepancies, the GBI told Matthew and his police department that they would do their best to expedite the investigation. He had to be placed on administrative leave until everything was sorted out, but was assured he'd be back to work as quickly as possible. It took 3 weeks for Jessica to come out of a coma, but unfortunately, she suffered a severe brain injury and couldn't remember much of that night. She actually assumed that she had been in a car accident and immediately began asking where her children were. Soon after waking up, GBI agents were sent to question her about what happened. According to Jessica, the last thing she remembered was coming home from Walmart and needing to take the dogs for a walk. It was raining outside, so she didn't want to take the kids with her. She asked Matthew to watch the kids while she took the dog for a walk, but she recalled him saying no, possibly because he was getting ready to go meet his friend at Waffle House. She reportedly said, "Fine, well, you're just going to have to listen to them cry then," and put Tyler in his crib. She said she remembered walking in the closet, but nothing else after that.
And I was going to the closet to change my shoes because it had been raining outside and I had on like heeled booties and I didn't want to go outside in the rain in those. And so I was changing my shoes. But that's the absolute last thing I remember was I was about to go walk the dog because that's why the baby was in his crib. Because I'd asked Matthew, hey, can you watch the baby while I go walk the dog real quick? It's raining outside. I don't want to take a newborn baby. You know, he was like 8 months old, but I was like, I don't want to take him out in the rain. You know, it'll take me 5-10 minutes, if that, just to go walk the dog. No, I'm not gonna do that. Okay, then I'm gonna go put him in his crib and you can listen to him cry because I'm not taking him outside in the rain. And so that's what I did. And then I went to go change my shoes. And that's the absolute last thing I remember before waking up in the hospital.
The GBI agents asked Jessica if she had ever used Matthew's firearm, but she said no. She even stated that on one occasion, Matthew asked her to get it for him, but she couldn't figure out how to remove it from the holster. Not only that, but she would have never tried to and leave her children without a mother.
I never was sad, to be honest. You know, I was ready to be done with him. You know, I was ready. You know, I was like, I'll walk out the door right now to be, you know, done. But I wasn't sad. I wasn't depressed. You know, I had had that job interview and everything and the orientation for it. So I was on my way. You know, I was at the point where I was just done and wanted out.
It's common protocol for someone even suspected of trying to take their own lives to be placed under constant surveillance by the hospital. However, after Jessica came to, her doctors could tell that she wasn't depressed. 2 separate psychiatrists didn't even find it necessary to refer her to mental health treatment and said that she was a very positive person with a sense of humor, calm, and gentle personality. Not only that, but during a GBI interview with Jessica's neurosurgeon, he described her injury as suspicious. Another trauma surgeon stated that her injuries did not fit the description of a self-inflicted gunshot, and neither of her hands had gunpowder stippling. He said that the wound being on top of her head would indicate that she would have had to hold the gun above her head pointing downward, but one of the bullet holes in the wall was shot at an upward angle. During her hospital stay, a family member also took a photo of a C-shaped bruise on the back of Jessica's head and sent it to the GBI. The idea was that it was an indication of a fight leading up to the incident. During the investigation, it was clear that Matthew's fellow officers were either trying to paint Jessica in a certain light, or that Matthew had painted her in that light himself, and they were just repeating what they had heard. During interviews, they stated that Jessica had physically assaulted Matthew in the past and was basically unpredictable. Throughout her hospital stay, Matthew only visited Jessica one time, accompanied by his grandpa Wendell. He also immediately moved in with his mistress, Courtney Calloway, along with his 2 children. To add insult to injury, even though the hospital didn't think Jessica's wounds were self-inflicted and didn't think she was at all, Matthew still filed a family violence protection order against her. Once she was released from the hospital and into her grandparents' care, she wasn't even allowed to see her sons and was ordered to complete yet another psychological evaluation. For months, a judge granted Matthew temporary full custody, and Jessica was only allowed to see her sons for a few hours on Sundays while being supervised by an armed officer. Over the course of the investigation, the GBI recorded interviews with nearly a dozen Griffin police officers and Matthew's friends, but never recorded any from Jessica's side regarding the dynamics of their relationship or his treatment toward her. They also came to their conclusion that Jessica tried to from the head by only taking their chief medical examiner's analysis into account. However, this medical examiner never even examined Jessica and only spent around 90 minutes looking at photos post-surgery. The report also never mentioned the C-shaped bruise that her family member took a photo of, and by September, they closed the case. Matthew was relieved of any wrongdoing and able to go back to work with full custody of their sons. By December of 2016, Matthew and Courtney Calloway had since broken up, and he was already dating another woman named Shelby Willie. During this time, Jessica and Matthew were finalizing their divorce, and Matthew was supposed to have returned all of her personal belongings. However, Jessica noticed that the duffel bag she had packed in preparation to leave before the incident was still missing, which contained almost all of her clothes. Matthew signed a sworn statement that he no longer had any of her things, and Jessica ultimately had to purchase all new clothes. In January of 2017, Matthew and Shelby were packing and getting ready to move in together when she found the duffel bag containing all of Jessica's things. When she asked Matthew about it, he told her that he planned on burning it since it was the bag she packed the night she planned on leaving him. Shelby knew that Matthew had signed that sworn statement about not having any of Jessica's belongings, which disturbed her. It was like he was holding on to these items out of spite and as a last piece of control over his ex-wife. During this time, many people in the community who had kept up with the case didn't feel like justice had been served, and like Matthew had essentially gotten away with attempted murder. There were just too many holes in the timeline and story, and they believed that he had staged and attempted after finding Jessica's divorce diary in the closet and losing his temper. A Facebook page called Justice for Jessica was created to discuss the details of the case, and one man named Will Sanders took a strong interest in uncovering the truth. Even though Will was a truck driver by day, his main hobby was true crime sleuthing and investigating police corruption. He decided to conduct his own investigation and filed over 100 open records requests. He also retraced Matthew's drive from the apartment to the Waffle House with a stopwatch and got permission from the new tenants to examine the bullet holes in the closet where Jessica was found. Based on his findings, he didn't believe that there was any way that Jessica could have or would have done those things to herself. He also examined Matthew's cell phone records, which showed that in the time leading up to the incident, during and after, he had been texting his mistress, Courtney Calloway. However, if you recall, it was stated that when he entered the apartment, he laid down his keys and cell phone in the kitchen before making his way to the master bedroom. He then went outside and used his radio to call for help, and later on, his cell phone was found on the kitchen counter. But Will and others believe that the data and time shows that Matthew was texting Courtney after he had already radioed the police and was allegedly outside, frantic that his wife was trying to and the children. If his phone was inside and he was outside, how was he texting her? These are just more details and loose ends that weren't properly investigated and could paint a different picture of what actually took place. After only around 6 months of dating, Matthew was back to his old ways and basically treating Shelby just like he had treated Jessica during their marriage. He monitored her location whenever she left the house, didn't like her going out, and she later said she felt like he was a ticking time bomb. She also was becoming more concerned about the flippant way he spoke about what happened to Jessica, reporting that he said things like, "It's a shame she didn't do it right the first time." By then, Jessica was granted 50-50 custody of their sons, which clearly made Matthew upset and like he was losing more control. In May of 2017, Shelby finally decided to leave Matthew and wanted to help Jessica because she also felt that he wasn't taking proper care of their sons during his time with them. By that point, it was well known that Will Sanders was working on the case, and Shelby decided to message him about Matthew having Jessica's duffel bag. Even though he couldn't get in trouble for attempted murder, he could get in trouble for lying in a sworn statement as a police officer. As she was moving out of their house, Will asked her to get the bag and bring it to him. Will then turned the bag over to the Griffin Police Department for proof that Matthew was lying about keeping Jessica's belongings. You might be thinking that this entire bag situation seems really petty, and it did to me too, but the people fighting for justice for Jessica just wanted to show that if Matthew was willing to lie about something as small as a duffel bag, what else was he willing to lie about? Not only that, but lying on a sworn statement could get him fired from his job, and having a potential attempted murderer off the streets as an officer is better than nothing. So with the duffel bag as evidence, Matthew's higher-ups had no choice but to bring him in for questioning regarding his sworn statement. At first, they gave him the opportunity to tell the truth about why the bag was still in his possession, and of course, he continued to lie. However, after being shown photos of the bag, he eventually told the truth and knew his time as a Griffin police officer was over.
All right. So Jessica came in, she filed a report.
Okay.
I talked to you about it. You wrote a statement saying you didn't have any of her items.
Right.
The report specifically said her retainer and stuff like that, her clothes.
Okay.
Do you know anything about where her clothes or retainer might have been?
Like I told her before, the only thing that we might have had would have been in that white trailer, and my stepdad does not mention anything else being in there. And we gave everything back that we had.
And you moved into the house that you're at now, your residence. Did you or did you not see this bag?
Yes, sir. It was in my storage room in the garage.
All right. Now, why would I be holding a picture of this bag?
I guess because Jessica brought it into you.
Why would Jessica have it if you had it at your house?
I don't know. I guess somebody got it from my garage or my shed.
Who would have got it?
There's a couple of people.
Okay.
I don't know.
I'm walking around outside. Why would you say you didn't have the damn bag when you had it? You know you can't give a sworn statement and lie on it.
I know, Sarge.
Why would you do that, Matthew? It was a bag, man. It wasn't. It's not like it was. Talk to me, man. I mean, help me understand.
Sarge, I swear, I know it's hard to believe, but I didn't think about that bag. Otherwise, I wouldn't have wrote. I said, hold on, little T. I got something. Let me go get it. I swear, I wouldn't have done that because I've got 2 kids, 3 and 1. I wouldn't jeopardize that over a bag. I'm telling you, Sarge, if I would have thought about it then, I would have said something.
But you knew you had the bag. Did you not know you had the bag?
I'm sorry, mine's right. I fucked up. I know I didn't. I should have turned it in, but not only because I'm a cop, because I should have, because it was Jessica. Even if she let me use it,
It was the right thing to do, man.
I'm clear.
But as another way to protect Matthew, instead of firing him, they allowed Matthew to resign so that he could still work for other departments in the future without having a termination on his record. 2 months after his resignation, Matthew was arrested and charged with 2 felonies, making false statements and violating his oath of office. He was almost immediately released on bail, and it took over 9 months for anything further to happen with the case. In April of 2018, Jessica called the Spalding County District Attorney's Office to ask why the case hadn't yet gone before the grand jury. They said that the DA needed to establish that Matthew had actually been administered the oath of office before it could move forward, and so far, they weren't able to locate that document. However, once again, people keeping up with the case knew that this was just a way to drag things on and hopefully get the case thrown out. So a reporter ended up submitting an open records request to the Griffin Magistrate Court. Within 3 hours, she found a copy of Matthew's official oath of office, a document the DA's office claimed to have been unsuccessfully looking for 6 months. After the document was found, the case was presented to a grand jury in July of 2018. However, they ultimately decided to not indict Matthew for making false statements or violating his oath, and just 4 months later, he was hired on as a reserve officer in Brazos County. Following Jessica's recovery, she's gone on to do several interviews with crime shows and podcasts to talk about her experience. Even though she can't remember everything, there's enough that lends credibility to what she believes happened the night of the incident. For example, she says she remembers going into her closet to change shoes to walk the dog, and when the police arrived at the scene, the dog was still wearing his leash. Also, given that Jessica did her best to keep the divorce journal hidden from Matthew, the fact that it was sitting out in the open and had pages ripped out may mean that he found it that night. She had evidence of his affair in there, plans for custody and alimony, so it's not hard to imagine someone as controlling as Matthew losing his cool and attacking Jessica. Some people have speculated that he threatened her with the gun, and when she tried to wrestle it away, he decided to hit her with it, which may explain the bruise and the 2-inch gash on the top of her head. Then he tried to stage it as a suicide attempt by firing the gun in the closet and sending that text to himself from her phone before speeding away. Speaking of the text, Jessica has said that there is proof in there that it didn't come from her, given the grammar and the fact that she said, "I love you" at the end. Jessica said she didn't love him at that point and wouldn't have said it, and would have used commas and punctuation. She also said she wouldn't have said thoughts, but thoughts. I also found it interesting that in text, there is a part where it says, "here lately," which is a little bit of an abnormal way to begin a sentence. It's not unheard of, but definitely not the way everyone speaks. However, I did find several places in interviews with Matthew where he begins his sentences that way, even right after the incident.
I mean, ask Guthrie, man, this is a common thing here lately.
The other thing many people seem to find suspicious is the red and gray sweatshirt detail. Matthew's clothes were never taken in or tested for gunpowder residue or blood, and in one video, I heard that they never found a gray sweatshirt. However, in the police body cam video, I could clearly see the gray sweatshirt right there on the bed, so maybe he took it off right before going outside to wait for the police. But regardless, I think all of this just shows that police immediately jumped to the conclusion that it was an attempted suicide and didn't even try to see it as anything else or gather the proper evidence to prove that one way or the other. Law enforcement has also tried to explain away the time discrepancies of when the gunshots were heard. These witnesses said that the gunshots were spread apart, which wouldn't have made sense if the second one was an immediate accidental shot after Jessica tried to shoot herself in the head. The GBI said that it's common for people to misremember times, but would multiple people misremember something as important as gunshots in their own apartment building? Not only that, but the fact that their oldest son was sound asleep when police arrived is a little suspicious as well. It would make more sense if there were gunshots at 11 p.m., and then a few hours passed and he had fallen asleep rather than just soundly sleeping through 2 loud gunshots in the next room minutes before police arrived. Even though there are many people who believe that Jessica was either struck with something or shot by Matthew and it grazed the top of her head, there are just as many people who think that it was self-inflicted. On some forums regarding this case, some people have mentioned a flashlight saving Jessica's life. I didn't understand what they meant by this at first, but then I remembered hearing the description of Matthew's gun and how it had a flashlight attachment at the end. I tried to make this little diagram to show that it could technically be possible for Jessica to have shot herself with his gun without having to point the gun in an odd direction on the top of her head. If she didn't have much experience with guns, she could have held it to her head like this and thought that the flashlight was actually the barrel against her head, and when she fired, the bullet would go in an upward trajectory. Then the bullet could have grazed her, theoretically making a 2-inch wound on top of her skull, but again, I think this would take more in-depth investigating, which the GBI and police department obviously weren't willing to do. People have also brought up the lack of blood splatter in the closet, the fact that Jessica was laying perfectly on a pillow, and the weird detail of the lock being located inside the closet. However, when I was watching back the crime scene video, I did see this area on the wall in the bedroom that looked like it could be blood. Maybe it's an indication that a fight took place outside of the closet and then Matthew put her in there to stage the suicide. Or maybe it's just a normal stain. Perhaps the hardest part of the story for people to believe is that Matthew didn't even try to locate his children when he entered the home.
She didn't shoot my kid. I didn't know where she was. If I was dealing with a possible active scenario where she still had the gun and she had shot Tyler, and then I could have been the next target.
He allegedly gets a suicide text from his wife, who he knows has access to a firearm, but he doesn't try to beat down the door or at least check the kids' bedrooms, where they just so happen to be sleeping safe and sound. I don't know about you, but I don't know any parent that would just wait outside if they thought that their child was in danger. He couldn't even take the time to glance in their bedrooms to see if they were in there before leaving the apartment. That just seems very unlikely. And he may have felt fine about going and waiting outside because he knew Jessica was no longer a threat and thought that she was dead in a locked closet. But you'll have to let me know what you think. Over the years, Jessica's grandparents have written letters to the GBI, the governor, the district attorney, and as many officials as possible to request the investigation be reopened. There's even been petitions signed, but as of now, it seems like the investigation will remain closed and Matthew Boynton will get to continue living his life serving as an armed officer. If he is innocent, then a thorough investigation should have been done to prove that, rather than doing a rush job to get him back at work as quickly as possible. There's many people who believe that this case is a prime example of certain law enforcement agencies still operating under a good old boy system and do their best to protect their own until concrete evidence forces their hand. And even then, they're given the opportunity to resign rather than being fired for their indiscretions, just so that they can work in another town with citizens unaware of their past. People in this camp have even speculated that the officer who came to Matthews the night of the incident to get his statement regarding the phone and Walmart incident could have known what happened to Jessica. They think that by the time he got there, Jessica was already in the closet and he helped Matthew come up with a plan. They point to the fact that his body cam was dead and that he supposedly never went upstairs to get Jessica's side of the story as evidence, but again, this is just speculation. Despite the current outcome, Jessica has done her best to get back to somewhat of a normal life. However, This was obviously easier said than done, especially since she was having to send her children with someone who in her heart she believes tried to murder her. Not only that, but in the summer of 2018, their oldest son Tyler began crying and clinging to Jessica every time they had to switch for custody, and started saying that Matthew was hurting him at home. She reported these statements to DCFS, and a children's psychologist interviewed the children about what was going on. In the interviews, Tyler said that Matthew makes him sad and that Daddy scares me and hurts me in his house. During the DCFS investigation, Jessica was given temporary full custody while the children's psychologist continued to see them for 25 visits. Based on her report, in the spring of 2019, DCFS recommended that they no longer spend time with Matthew. However, on Facebook, it appears that Matthew does still see his sons at least on occasion, so it's not clear whether or not the judge took the DCFS's recommendation into account. Jessica now lives 2 hours away from where the incident took place and has started a new life with her fiancé, Jacob Boynton. Jessica and Jacob knew each other in high school and rekindled their relationship, going on to have a son together as well. Jacob has been described as jovial, gentle, and has helped Jessica along in her physical and emotional recovery. Even though she still has occasional migraines and other issues related to her injuries, it seems that she is finally at peace in her new life with someone who loves and respects her. However, many people, including Jessica and her loved ones, still have hope that one day the truth will be revealed about what happened in the closet. So what do you think about this case? Do you think that it's possible that Jessica inflicted those injuries on herself, or that Matthew attacked her and then attempted to cover it up? Even if that's true, do you think there was enough evidence to prove it? Let me know if you have any other theories, and if there is still a chance for justice to be served. This has been Joshua John with Behind the Headlines, and until next time, stay safe.